Hi, everybody. It's Carol. It's week two of OTL 5500. I had a great week last week. I was in Kansas City and enjoyed my week off, and I hope you did too. Um, I am having a hard time getting back in the saddle, and I wonder if you are too. This week we are talking about using games in curriculum for teaching, and this is something I'm familiar with, so I will dig right in. First of all, we were asked to point out something that we didn't know from the articles. And one of the things that I was not familiar with was the term differentiated instruction. And it talks about the way in which a teacher would modify the curriculum to meet the needs of the majority of students. In the past, I have considered the multiple intelligences theory of learning, which speaks more of how a student learns as opposed to the curriculum used. And so this is sort of looking through the other lens, the teacher lens, I guess. And so I enjoyed reading the articles, and that was a new way of looking at it and modifying curriculum, and certainly that is something that we should do, and would be something that I would want to do in that sort of engaged learning that we've talked about in the past. The other comment that really struck me, though, that was different that I hadn't considered was one from the video in the article that was written by Rick Brennan. And he noted that he didn't want his students to get all of the knowledge from his brain, that or to think that he was the center of learning, but that he was rather someone who was guiding learning so that students could discover knowledge for themselves. And I thought that's really sort of a scary thing for teachers. And I think when I taught, I was more focused on saying, I want you to learn this. I'm going to give you these thoughts, these facts, and I want you to learn these and to know these. And I like that idea, though, because I think that then that makes a more critical thinker, and also someone you're actually giving a tool to, that they can go forth from your classroom and use the tools that you've given them to, say, do research or something. Now, of course, when you're teaching middle school, that's even scarier because you don't feel like they're that mature either. And there is some fact-based learning that they have to have a certain set of skills that are mastered and so on. But I do like the idea that really we should not think of ourselves when we're teaching that they need to get everything from us, but self-discovery is a really important idea there. So I appreciated that comment. The second question was to describe one topic or aspect of the articles that I would like to know more about. And that one thing that I'd like to know more about, and it's not really so much because I would like to use it, but I wondered whether Historia is a successful product. I was very interested in the idea that they aligned their product with the curriculum, the history, curriculum, and I know that it's successful for the creators because they're using it in their classrooms, but I actually went to Histrionics, their website, to see who was using it, who could buy it, because it said it would launch in 2014. And it seems as though it's only being used in lab type schools or alternative schools, or schools that maybe have budgets that are different than public schools might have. And I wonder if it's expensive. I wonder if it's maybe more widespread now than it was at the time. But intuitively, I would think that if it were, it would be available on their website, or there'd be more information. Then contact us for information. So I don't know. I wonder how that's going. I think it's a very interesting concept, and it presents a lot of ideas about classroom management and how you would do that. It just looked very interesting, and I thought it would be a fun thing to do if you could get it to work out as a teacher. I think it would be a very fun way to teach. I also wondered if students get to rewrite history on how they solve their dilemma. So that would be, I would assume that they would, that their civilization might die, for instance, if they weren't able to defeat Alexander the Great. One other thing I wondered about, which was related to the other article, if you do that pre-assessment for the differentiated instruction, for instance, the article suggested that you would do a pre-assessment to understand what your students knew, and then you would tailor the lessons for that unit based on what your students knew. And to me, it seems you would have your lessons prepared prior to going into the unit. How would you do that logistically? So I'm sure those people have that worked out, that they're not giving the pre-assessment on Friday and rewriting all their or writing all their lesson plans over the weekend, or doing it on Monday and having them ready for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or whatever. But I just would be curious about that. And actually, I think that there were lesson plans for those particular games down in the at the bottom of the page, but I wonder for themselves if their own teaching lesson plans, what they would do about that. So those were my questions of what I would like to know more about. Now, do you think that instructors as a whole should use more games-based learning in their classrooms? I don't know if they should use more, but I definitely think there's a place for games. I think that games serve a definite place in the classroom. I think that they take knowledge which can be very dry, and they awaken different parts of the brain, because they generally speaking are going to use um, parts of the brain that are not used by sitting there listening to a lecture. In one of the videos, the little boy said, I get so bored just sitting there listening to the teacher. And I think, well, that's true. Who doesn't? And I think that by being able to even just touch something, that unlocks a different part of the brain, and helps to imprint that knowledge on the brain. And so then when you do an active running game or something like that, then I certainly think that that helps. Would it depend on grade level and content area? I think absolutely grade level, but content area, no. I think any content area would be appropriate. I think you can develop something from any content area would be fine. And I think back to my days when I taught at our church. And one of the things that we did in our after school program was we had 13 weeks of instruction. And so we used a lot of storytelling and a lot of games, crafts, cooking, that kind of thing. And I can tell you from that experience, when I would teach 50 and 60 kids at one setting, that we would see what they would remember was really phenomenal. They would, and we didn't have book tests, and they didn't have to, stand up and recite. We didn't do that sort of thing, but they really were able to remember a lot. And so one of the things that we would do, for instance, one of the stories was the Israelite exodus from Egypt. And it's a very long story. It starts with plagues, and, the Passover, and there's the parting the Red Sea, and there's manna from heaven in the wilderness. And so we would take it in chunks, and then after we did a chunk of information, I would create a game that was a relay race. And so for the relay race, for those particular plot points, they would have to leap like a frog, which was one of the plagues. They'd have to do a red X on a piece of paper. They'd run through the Red Sea, and they'd be misted with water by the adult volunteers. They'd eat a mini marshmallow, and then they'd race like crazy back to the end of their line, which they loved doing because it was a competition. But they could tell you what they were doing after the fact. And if we had just read the story out of the Bible, or if we had just told the story even, they really just didn't get it, because they were little kids. It was not really that relevant to their lives, but in that way it made it relevant because they owned it after it was done. So I think that it is really a good way to teach, and I also think that it's a fun way to do it, and so it was very engaging. Also, I used games when I taught middle school and high school, and they loved it. However, I think doing it in a college classroom, which is what I hope to do, and the current Pokemon craze aside, I think that college students in an online classroom would find it very irrelevant. It would not provide any relevance to their life, and I think they would find it to be a waste of time. So I would not use it in that setting. I think that they would want to be sort of, get it done kind of like we are in our classes. I think I would use engaged learning in other ways. I would still try and use differentiated learning where I'm using a variety of methods to teach, but I don't think I would use games in my online classroom with college students. So I'll be interested to hear your take on this and your experiences. And I hope to get some rest and get back on track. So I'll talk to you later. Bye.